So we have now just started the recording. Hello, my name is Will Hull, and this is the Wyoming wildcard team for Unit 2, Division D, hearing for the We the People National Finals. In a moment, I will have the judges introduce themselves, followed by the students, and then we'll begin the hearing. Students will deliver a 4-minute prepared statement, followed by an 8-minute session of judge follow-up questions. My microphone will be muted during the session, and during that time, I will be holding up the 1 minute, as well as the time signs. I was down on the floor, that's why I was reaching down. I'll be holding these signs up during that hearing to signal those periods. I suggest for those of you probably up on the screen, if you can view in the gallery view, if it's not already set to that, it's in the top right-hand corner, so that you can see everybody as well as see me holding up those cards. And at the conclusion of the hearing, the judges will provide some brief feedback before the hearing officially closes. At this time, I'll go ahead and pass the microphone over to the judges to begin the hearing.
Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Congratulations for being here. We are thrilled to be with you. My name is Tim Igo. I am a writer, a magazine editor, and a lawyer, and I work at the State Bar of Arizona in Phoenix. And if I could ask Judge Dunlap to introduce himself.
Sure. Good to see you all. My name is Chuck Dunlap. I'm president and CEO of the Indiana Bar Foundation, and I am in Indianapolis, Indiana.
And I'm Nick Drummond. I'm an assistant professor of political science at Black Hills State University in South Dakota.
And if we could ask you to introduce yourselves.
I'm Jessica Petrie, and I'm a senior here at Green River High School. My name is Emma Christiansen. I am also a senior here. And my name is Abby Atkinson. I am also a senior.
Wonderful. Sorry, losing my voice. So as Will said at the top, we are Unit 2, and this is question 2. And let me read the question, and at the conclusion of it, please feel free to begin. One founder claimed that representatives should refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens, whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders, and what alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century?
We agree that representatives should refine public views. Surveys have shown that only 33% of American citizens can name all 3 branches of the U.S. government. The other 67% of people still clearly have the right to their views and beliefs, but choosing some of the most educated individuals to represent citizens' views creates a more streamlined system. There are some undereducated individuals in the country, and viewing their ideas through a representative system allows their viewpoint to still be heard, but with less irrational decisions getting made. The representatives shouldn't, however, change the views of the public. Representatives will ideally preserve the public's opinions, but communicate them concisely to citizens and other government officials. Much debate went into the representation needed for our country. 2 types of representation debated were direct versus indirect.
Direct entails the individual voting for each citizen, where an indirect spokesperson is put forward to represent a common group. After the issues associated with the English king, American citizens feared a lack of true representation in their government.
Despite this, the founding fathers believed that many citizens weren't educated enough to effectively participate in government. The main mode of representation that was debated and consequently enacted was the indirect elected spokesperson. There are 3 main forms of spokesperson representation: delegate, trustee, and politico. The delegate model of representation states that representatives are to do what is most correctly representing those within the area they are elected to exemplify, despite personal beliefs or self-imposed morality.
The trustee model places the burden of the representatives to be the opposite, in so that the representative is trusted to be an accurate advocate only through the lens of their personal beliefs.
Politico is a mixture of these 2 models, with representatives considering both beliefs of the people in their elected area and their own moral code. This concerns the wisdom of the individual and the quote discussed today.
When looking at a trustee model, it entirely places the trust of wisdom into the hands of the representatives, and that they are certainly a refinement of public view.
This is not always the case, however, and it is so more often are reflective of the views that of the people for representatives to consequently include in the common beliefs of that state.
One debated topic was how to have representatives complete this purpose of accurate representation.
Today, we see some discrepancy between the popular vote and that of the Electoral College and representatives.
Typically, the explanation for this difference is due to the use of a winner-takes-all system, where all of the electoral votes for a state must be used to vote for the winner of the popular vote of that state in 48 states.
This process is used in all states but Nebraska and Maine. Many take issue with this because the votes of the state minority are discounted, no matter how close the vote may have been.
It is also simple for representatives in this model to disregard political concepts, and instead choose to represent only themselves. Many representatives take it upon themselves to simply base things upon their own morality rather than the morality of the people.
In the 21st century, we should be considering a more direct and fairly distributed form of representation, such as a popular vote.
Each individual should not be making the decisions themselves, but rather getting accurate representation. We should give territories representation and give remote or adjust the Electoral College to more accurately represent the country.
Gerrymandered districts must also be more evenly distributed. The US wouldn't be entirely changing the process through which it elects individuals, but rather refining and defining how best to represent the people, but still allowing uneducated views, without allowing uneducated views to overhaul important governmental processes.
Thank you so much. Well done. Now we'll have the opportunity for a couple of questions from the judges, and after that we'll have some feedback. Let me begin with this question. You talked about different methods and strategies for representation. Let's talk about the size of the House of Representatives. And do you believe that the House is or is not simply too small to accurately reflect the views of the American people?
Well, certainly electing more representatives would allow more different views and more different areas of the public to be heard. It's difficult to tell whether these representatives from the same areas would end up just representing the same views over and over again.
Although the issue is that it isn't necessarily the size, but rather that it's the same type of people that are getting in office. We don't see the type of diversity that we're looking for. And if we truly saw that, then the amount of people we have in the House of Representatives could be enough, but in the system we have it doesn't stand as enough because it's not diverse.
I believe that the diversity of the House of Representatives is more important than the amount of people in it.
Thank you.
When you talk about diversity, what sort of aspects are you looking for? Should that be built into the system, that a certain percentage of the members should represent various either gender or racial groups or something else?
I don't believe that it should be required for there to be a certain specific amount of diversity within the House of Representatives, simply because that would create an internal bias that we are most certainly trying to prevent. However, by making sure that the representation is more evenly distributed and getting rid of certain gerrymandering, we may be allowing for greater diversity within the House.
There's also a lot more components that we would need to be looking towards, like economic diversity, cultural diversity, and different things other than just the obvious ones that people look to today, like racial and gender diversity. So those would need to be taken into account. And if we put a limit saying, this is the amount of people we need of this group and this group, we would eventually have a system where it would be, we need someone who's exactly this specific person, which wouldn't lead us to true representation. That'd be an absurd process.
And if we have the diversity of the different social groups and things like that, we would have diversity of opinions that would represent all groups of people.
So you mentioned the idea of redistricting and districting for those congressional districts. How do you think the best way to do that is? Should politics be part of the equation, or is there some other way that you would suggest that is better to, in the end result, establish those congressional districts?
So there would be two changes that would be necessary to make them even. First, I would say that we would need to make sure it's even population. There's some districts that have more people than others, and those are disproportionately minority populations typically in the United States. And then secondly, we could do it based on a system that wouldn't be going around corners and making sure that certain populations were in certain districts, but instead maybe straight lines on geographical regions or something to that extent.
As well as that we should not be creating districts based on political parties, because this creates an internal obvious bias as to what party each district will lean towards.
Thank you.
Let me take you back to the American constitutional debate and the anti-federalists who, as you know, were critical of the Constitution, including the mode of representation that Madison seems to be advocating for. Just two things to point to that come to mind are term limits and rotating representatives. What do you think about these possible features of representation?
What was the second one? Can you repeat?
Yeah, term limits and rotating representatives.
Okay, thank you.
I believe that term limits should be incorporated just so that we can have more of that diversity of opinion instead of the same one over and over again.
Making sure that we are rotating through different representatives, make sure that the opinions are changing with time, because as time passes, obviously opinions are going to change. And so making this change in representation makes it possible for us to see new opinions as the times go on.
In addition, we can make sure that those term limits were set to a reasonable way that we wouldn't have problems like people just trying to get in for a short period of time for political gain. We could create longer term periods, or we could make it so there's an incentive afterwards, like that they still get paid or something to that extent, so they don't have a political incentive to be corrupt while in office.
Thank you.
Let me ask, if we had term limits, it occurs to me that the size of the federal government was a lot smaller when the founders created our systems. They may not have anticipated a permanent, large, tens of thousands of size civil service of bureaucracy. Will our elected officials with strict term limits have time to get up to speed to be able to cause some good?
Yes, so we believe that if we were to enact term limits properly, they would still have time to get what they need done. In addition, it would incentivize them to actually get things done, because they can't sit there forever and say, I'll do it eventually. They have an incentive to get it done because their term will expire soon. And of course, for their own political gain, they have to get things done or the public's going to hate them.
How do you react to the idea that ultimately this comes down to whether or not we trust our fellow citizens? Do you agree with that, or is there more to it than that in how we select our representatives and how our system works?
Well, the thing is, when we're electing a representative, we are trying to see who they are, not only through political views, but also as a person. We need to know whether we can trust them before we elect them into office. And so when we're looking at this, we need to know that when we're electing someone in, they are going to be keeping the eyes of the public in mind when they are making decisions.
How does it work with us trusting our fellow citizens who are electing these people? You mentioned the sort of the uneducated views aspect. Do we just have to rely that they will ultimately do what is in the best interests of themselves and or the country? Or, I think a lot of bad things have been done with the idea of you're not smart enough or you're not X enough to be able to vote. How do we balance those? What's the best solution forward?
So the way that we are balancing this is the balance of representatives not being direct. So what we were getting at the very beginning is if everyone were to vote for things themselves, then that would be the issue, is undereducated views would be more prominent and more rash decisions could be made. But because we have directly elected officials and indirectly elected officials in our government through the different branches, it creates a balance where those opinions are still heard, but they don't triumph over the decisions of everything within government. So they can still be heard with the current system, and they're still not recognized to the extent that they can overthrow.
Thank you.
How do South Dakotans, people from Wyoming, convince Californians that it's a good idea to have equal representation in the Senate?
So within representation in the Senate, it would come down to little states wanting more power. So when little states want more power, such as South Dakota and Wyoming, the only way to convince a state like California that we would still deserve to have more representation in the Senate is something like the House of Representatives, where they have more power. However, because of the way the Electoral College is set up, it's not necessarily that way, but that would be one solution.
Excellent. Thank you all very, very much. That was an excellent conversation. Take a breath. You did well. Now we'll give a little bit of feedback. I'll begin. I appreciated that dialogue very much. I thought it was a deep and thoughtful one. Your discussion of, I wanted more time to get into the electoral college gap that's been created and what your thinking is on that. I think you were maybe the first team today I've heard to talk about gerrymandering. So that was a useful thing. And as Judge Drummond indicated, this discussion and others indicated, this discussion largely is about trust, isn't it? It's the trust of the elected officials, but it really is about what we think of our fellow citizens and where that trust lies and whether it's well placed. So, so if there's any indication with this group, I'm very confident about the future of the Republic. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll give a little bit of feedback as well. I thought it's obvious that you have a high depth of knowledge in this area, and that's always fun for us to talk about with smart, intellectual people who have studied this, as you obviously have this past semester and probably longer. A couple of the ideas that we've struggled with and will continue to struggle with is, some of the fundamental aspects of enlightened citizenship. And I think you're displaying it certainly now, but unfortunately, I'm not sure that I would suggest that all of our citizens and folks eligible to vote have the same level of knowledge. And if it's some sort of a basic tenet of our democracy that we have the sort of a baseline, then I think that's an area that we can improve on personally. And that's one of the things we talked about is what are these fundamental assumptions and are they true today? And if not, how do we correct them? And I think it's interesting too, this question brings into focus the idea of, some of the other questions just take for granted this is the system, et cetera, but this is calling for specific improvements, alternatives. And your discussion was really along those lines. And it's the forward-looking questions that we're going to have to deal with to, make our system of government work better as things progress and change. And there could be some fundamental changes that are tough to do, but it's an interesting discussion. And again, I thought your depth of knowledge in the area made it a lot more interesting and fun to be able to talk with you about it. So thank you.
Thank you.
What I noticed is you really worked well as a team. Whenever one of you had an answer, the other two were ready to jump in right after and supplement and build upon what that person said. And that shows me how well prepared you were for the competition. So well done with that. Not much room to critique. Maybe if I would point at one thing, it would be perhaps maybe citing or referencing the founding documents more, quoting founders, pointing to specific parts of the Constitution. That can always strengthen anyone. But again, not much to criticize at all. I thought you did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, congratulations and thank you for your hard work. This wraps up the Wyoming Wildcard Unit 2 Division D hearing. And feel free to say whatever else you'd like to say to the judges while they leave the room.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank
Great
you.
job.